Hello everybody, and thank you for attending this CREST webinar today. It is called Mind Your Language and why language is important in neurodiversity. Your presenter today is Nicola Whiting, who is CSO at Titania. And I will be passing over to her shortly with the presentation, but I just wanted to go through a couple of things. You will get a chance at the end of this presentation to ask Nicola some questions, so please feel free to do that. You can do it in two ways. You can either type into the question pane throughout the presentation so you don't forget your question, and I will ask Nicola at the end those questions, or you can type into the question pane at the end of the presentation. Or if you would like, you could raise your hand. So when we get to the end, we can unmute you and obviously give you a chance to ask those questions that you are probably itching to ask at that time. Okay, so that's lovely. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And I will pass over to Nicola. Over to you.
Hello. I don't know whether you can see my face at the moment or my slide deck, so I'm not quite sure, but thank you for inviting me to speak today. I really appreciate it. So I'm here to talk about the language of neurodiversity, and I will go into that, but just before, just so you know who I am in case you haven't encountered me before, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of Titania, and I don't know whether my slide deck's actually moving. There you go, try that again. There you go. Chief Strategy Officer of Titania, known for my work in AI, known for some of my work in mentoring other people with cyber accelerators, and also for speaking a lot about diversity. So first of all, I'd like to say I have a little bit of skin in the game because I co-own Titania, but I'm also autistic and a woman in tech. So some skin in the game there for diversity. And as you can see, it's not just me. I've been very, very lucky in that some people have said, yes, you genuinely do care about this and are doing good things. So I wrote a book called Extraordinary Women, which was really to highlight how diverse people can really achieve lots and lots of stuff, and that included people from different backgrounds, ethnicities, genders, and all kinds of stuff. So what is neurodiversity? So neurodiversity, first of all, although we say a different way of looking at the world, neurodiversity includes neurotypical people, and by neurotypical I mean the majority of people, just like ethnic diversity includes white people. So another word is neurodivergence, and that would be people that differ from the majority in some way, such as also these people here. So autism, spectrum folks, dyscalculia, dysnomia, dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, and OCD. Now, if you're not familiar with all of those phrases, they're all look-upable, and you can find them on the internet in many places, so I won't spend time here. But what I will talk about in terms of neurodivergence is it's a word that many people in these communities prefer to neurodiversity, mainly because neurodiversity is inclusive of neurotypical people, and we often talk about it when we want to increase the people that aren't neurotypical. I'm on the fence. I do use neurodivergence primarily now as an autistic person, but I also only use it when I'm really clear that divergence for me is the same sort of divergence as in the book Sapiens, i.e. we share a common ancestor in how we think, not divergence from the normal. So it just means that we've taken a different route. So the conversation that I want to have today isn't about autism or dyscalculia or dyspraxia or dyslexia, or about any of the labels of disability or about charity. It's about people just like most of us in this virtual room. So it's about people that are highly capable and highly qualified and generally underrepresented, but essential to our business success. And as the co-owner of a business, diversity is important to me because of what it brings, not just about being a good human being. So Neurodiversity, you'd think, is a relatively new word, but it isn't. It's a word that has been around for a little while in terms of concept. When everybody tends to come from similar backgrounds or experiences, they tend to come up with similar ideas. And similar ideas means that you haven't got as many opportunities for innovation on the table, and you haven't got as many ideas for how you might be resilient against attack or risk or all the other things. And if you think about our industry, about cybersecurity, about information technology, about InfoSec, whichever language you prefer, we only really do two things. We create new stuff, innovation, and we protect the stuff that has been made already, resilience against risk or against attack. So that's really interesting, isn't it? Because when you think about some of the biggest innovative things that have happened in our society, or protective things that have happened in our society, often including innovation, things like Tesla's electricity, who incidentally is thought to be autistic, or the fact that we would all be speaking German were it not for a group of code breakers in Bletchley Park. Again, there's very much some differences in thinking there. If you've ever watched the film on that, you know, groupthink is not a friend to business. So we've talked a little bit about innovation and some of the people that have come up with ideas, and not everybody are geniuses like that. Sometimes innovation is in the smaller steps. And I think everybody hopefully is familiar with the term continual improvement. And continual improvement is, again, another business concept that's really, really common. Another language, continual improvement. And continual improvement is just a series of people having ideas to do things slightly differently from the way you already do it that increases some or provides some benefit in efficiency or effectiveness or getting things done that we hadn't thought of before. So again, continual innovation does not come from groupthink, because otherwise you'd maintain the status quo. So talked about innovation. I'd like to talk about defense, which is the other thing that we do. So there is a brilliant book called The Art of War, and you may not have read it. It was actually by a Chinese general who was a military strategist and philosopher who lived around 2,500 years ago, called Sun Tzu. And Sun Tzu, The Art of War, is still taught at West Point and military schools across the globe. And there's even The Art of War for business and things like that for executives, which you can check out on Amazon. But essentially, the reason this book is still going, and it's older than the Bible, is it says really sensible things that everybody reads and goes, yeah, that makes sense. And one of the core things that Sun Tzu said is, and I'm going to read it directly from the book, if you know your enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not your enemy, for every victory gained, you will suffer defeat. And if you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. And what the heck does that mean? Well, basically, in short forms, it's important to understand your own capabilities, but if you want to defeat attackers, you must first learn to think like an attacker. So I just want you to think about groupthink, I want you to think about innovation, and I want you to think about thinking like an attacker. And how do attackers think? Well, strangely, they think in lots of different ways. So they come from different countries, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different genders, different beliefs, and different thinking types. So if we want to defeat them, doesn't it stand to reason that we need diversity on our side? And I can't see your faces, but I'm really, really hoping you're all nodding. That makes sense, right? So why don't we already have diversity on our side? Why do we still have conversations about not enough women in tech, not enough autistic people in tech, not enough support for dyslexic people, not enough understanding about dyscalculia, and all the other things that we mentioned earlier. Well, that comes down to another thing that we're all familiar with, which is computers, because we've got one. We have a human computer, and it's hardwired. So here's the neuroscience. We have a 150,000-year-old operating system. 150,000-year-old operating system makes Windows Vista look new. And if you've ever seen The Big Bang Theory, yes, we are all doomed. No, we're not. So like any operational system, it has operational shortcuts. And I think it's really important to frame these as it's going to help our discussion around language. So here are the two primary components of our human computer. We have an emotional brain and a logical brain. And apologies to any neuroscientists in the room. This is a very simplified version, as I'm sure you're already realizing. Those emotional and logical brains form independently in the womb before your neural network fully connects them together. So if you haven't already read the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, then I'd suggest that you read it, because it shows how we are literally in two minds about every decision. And the really important thing to note when we're having a discussion about language is the amygdala, our chimp brain, the little peanut on the left of your screen there, is the center for our emotions and emotional behavior and motivation. And that chimp brain gets all of the sensory information, our sights, our sounds, the facial expressions of the people in the room first. And its evolutionary hardwiring is designed around protection. So our 150,000-year-old brain does a lot about protection. So, for example, it wants us running from a mugger, not working out logically the strategic risks of a successful attack, which is what the logical brain might do. And we think mainly with our emotional brain. We make decisions emotionally first and then rationalize them. And it has a number of pre-programmed biases, and it tends to base its reality on external output. And you're like, okay, my mind is blown now. I'm, some people in the room I might be losing. So let me talk about it in a story term. So has everybody here done some gaming? They've picked up some controller, PlayStation, Xbox, whatever it might be, and you've played some kind of game. And have you felt your heart race? If you played one of those games on the ocean and you felt a bit seasick, have you been on a game where you're suddenly in a high position looking down and felt a bit vertigo coming on? That's because our emotional primate mind has difficulty recognizing the difference between gaming reality and real life reality. It affects how our bodies are working. It makes our heart beat faster, which is kind of why gaming's fun, because if it didn't do those things, then gaming would suck. So our emotional mind is pretty strong, and it is hardwired for our protection, which means that it can override the logical mind sometimes. And this can cause all kinds of problems. Just like in gaming, our emotional mind has difficulty telling fantasy from reality, and it's often got all kinds of negative biases. And why would our mind be programmed like that? So apologies for the poor quality of this slide. I pinched it, so but it's a common concept. So the reason that our brain's hardwired for negativity bias is, if you think about, let's say a primate, let's say an early man or Homo sapiens, wants to go out and get some berries, goes out of a cave, sees a nice big berry bush, and then hears a rustle in the bush next to it. Now, our brain, hardwired for protection, is immediately going to think, oh my God, that rustle could be a lion or a tiger or something hiding in the bush, or maybe somebody with a big spear that wants to kill me and steal all the things in my cave. I'm going to run back to my cave. Typically, that early man would not have gone, it's a rustle in a bush. I'm sure it's fine. It's just the wind. I'm going to go and get my berries. Because those people tended to be naturally selected out of the gene pool. And that 150,000-year-old brain, unfortunately, is still there. Only now it tends to be language that we focus on. So bringing this back into modern life, if you've ever had an appraisal or in a manager delivered an appraisal, you'll know a really typical experience is you'll go, fabulous, 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 10 times, and then there'll be a like 11th time and you'll go, oh, there's just this one thing. And either the person you're appraising will go, or in mentally or physically, or you will go, oh, right, now's the one thing. This is the thing they've been building up for. And that is your negativity bias in effect. So language and actually pictures tend to go through this negative bias where we think everybody else is having a better time of it than us. And that negative bias impacts us more than we would think. And just to pinch a slide from a different slide deck where I talk about imposter syndrome, negativity bias is a common one that contributes to imposter syndrome. So it leads us to comparing our worst moments to everybody else's best moments. And I like to call that the Instagram factor. And that happens throughout our lives as humans because of negativity bias. Sorry, I love that slide. It's my slide and I love it. So most people live with this every day. Neurotypical people live with this every day because this is our 150,000-year-old operating system. But now imagine the impact of negativity bias when you have this kind of language. So just so you know where this language is taken from, this is a book that is currently in schools given to I think it's A-level students. This is the revised AQA A-level psychology revision guide and workbook. And in this workbook, there is something called the theory of mind being discussed. And I've taken a little picture of a slide in this workbook. And actually, before it even gets to this, there is another little section where it talks generally about the theory of mind. And it talks about, and I'll just read this, it's on page 182, should anybody ever get this book. Theory of mind, TOM, refers to the ability to decenter and put yourself in someone else's place, understanding that they may be thinking and feeling differently to you. Sounds quite good, doesn't it? That sounds like something that would engender empathy. It is an essential ability for successful social interaction and develops in normal children at around 4 years of age. Now, just interesting, the word normal there. Not the majority, but normal. Now imagine that you're an autistic teenager. And if you remember back to your teenage years and how even small words could damage how you felt about yourself, just read some key autism symptoms. And I'd like you to just look at the center section on the right-hand side, where it says that autistic children like to stick to the same routine and little changes may trigger tantrums or may engage in repetitive activities such as opening and closing doors or lining things up. Tantrums is the word I'd like you to focus on there. So quite rightly, the autism community, which thankfully is becoming more vocal and active in their view, in their sort of sharing of view, said, actually, it's not a tantrum. A tantrum implies something that is controllable. This is a overwhelm caused by external factors that have impacted somebody to the state that they can no longer control their emotional response, which is very different to a tantrum. Thankfully, the Pearson, who are the authors of this book, have now written a revision, but this book will be out there. This book will be in numerous places, and ad infinitum will be influencing people. So imagine that you are a teenager and you are not only reading that for yourself, but you are seeing other peers reading this as though it's true, as though this is you. It's horrific, isn't it? And actually, borrowing from the way we tend to be cyclical as a society, this is not the first time that this language problem has arisen, and often arises in terms of the very people, the professionals that are trying to make things better. So this is why it's so important. So, for example, I'm going to use a different group that has traditionally been excluded and still suffers from language. So if you think about gay rights, I was born in 1971. And when I was born, the diagnostic manual, the manual actually that is used to quantify autism, still had homosexuality in as a mental disorder. A mental disorder that in the 60s you could have electroshock therapy for to cure you, which incidentally is something that has been done to autistic people too, amongst other things. So in that sort of period, that's when the Stonewall riots happened, and the gay community came out and said, look, this is not acceptable. We are not we're not a mental scenario. This is a difference in sexuality, and it's perfectly normal for a human to have a difference in sexuality. So I think language will change, and already has changed, because if you look at autism language, it is more positive than it was before. But I think this shows that we still have some way to go. And daily, I hear people really trying quite hard to do positive things, but using language that actually excludes the very people that they're trying to help. And very often it's because there weren't enough representatives in the room of the people that they were trying to help to point this out. So one of the reasons that I'm on the board of NeuroCyber and very honoured to be part of that group is they firmly believe in the not about us, without us principle, and have people of all different thought processes in the room when they are trying to help with this challenge. So, how do we fight groupthink around the language of neurodiversity, neurodivergence, and positive languaging? So that's really interesting, isn't it? Because, as I said, typically the people in the room that are trying to help are not always first-hand experiences of the impact of this language. So I think that is one of those things that we really need to change. But that does not mean that I am not incredibly happy and grateful for every one of you that has turned up today to be a superhero, because being an ally to neurodiversity not only is a good thing to do for businesses because of innovation and because of resilience and because we want better bottom line profits and everything else, but it's also the right thing to do as a good human being, because it's the practice. Allyship is the practice of emphasizing social justice and inclusion and human rights by a member of an in-group to advance the interests of an oppressed or marginalized group. That's literally the definition that came out. So it's everybody that isn't neurodivergent, every neurotypical in the room that wants to say, actually, I'm prepared to give my space to those people that need it to make this a more equal society for the benefit of everybody, as discussed, is somebody that I respect and admire. So allyship is part of anti-oppression, it's part of anti-racism, and it's part of inclusive conversations which put into practical use social justice theories and ideals. So, why are you here? Well, we came here to look at language, and that's something that I would happily contribute to. I haven't got all of the answers. I do spend a lot of time listening to social groups for various differences of thought, and other social groups that are minority groups, and listening is a good thing to do. But essentially, when we're looking at creating a diversity-friendly environment, language is something that we should think very hard about, because there is a huge difference when you are trying to get somebody support, or trying to support somebody as a manager or as an employer, between these two questions. Tell me about your disabilities so we can work out what support you need, versus tell me what accommodations we can meet to make you the most effective and efficient person possible to support you in being that. One is about, let's focus on your disability. And the other one is, you, just like every other employee that we have, are valued by us, and we want to make it an environment that works for you. So that looks a bit like this. We think about diversity as a hard thing, but actually it's just about making right behaviours a little bit easier and wrong behaviours a little bit harder. It's about calling out bad language as an ally, just like you would if somebody was using inappropriate language for ethnicity or sexuality. I would hope you would call that out too. And if you're not sure what language to use, because you're a decent human being, you don't want to get it wrong, then there are a discussion that we will have. And there are also some pretty good books on this too. And the important thing is, I think most people that are in marginalized group, if not all people, would say that if you are genuinely trying to be part of the solution, not part of the problem, that they would welcome that discussion and welcome having somebody that would be at their side helping balance where we are today. Thank you.
Oh, that is great. Thank you so much, and really interesting. So for any of you attendees out there at the moment that have been listening, it is your chance to ask Nicola any questions that you have of her. So please don't miss out on this chance. I know some of you may already be attending the workshop, which is due after this at 10 o'clock, but please feel free to raise your hand or to type anything into the question pane, so we can get that asked. And I do really like that that last picture, Nicola. I think that's brilliant. That's
very impressed with the last picture. Actually, Deb, I'm looking at the names on there, and I think the majority of people on there are actually attending the workshop later. So I'm recognising all the names actually.
Yeah, excellent.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Ali.
So just so you know, from the people that are in the workshop, I have sent something through, which is the social model of disability, which is actually came from the mainly the physical disability community, but as our brain like computers, I'm a big fan of operational shortcuts. So just like if you were a developer, you wouldn't, you know, typically you use some third-party plugins to make your development life easier. So this is my third-party plugin for the conversation that I'm hoping will help people understand the difference between the two languages. You know, the language of disability being a physical thing, or or a mental change that is non-inclusive, versus the social model of disability, which is how can we make this work for everybody.
Yeah, and I think making it work is really important, isn't it? Because we is it that people do get confused because we've had many changes sometimes in the language over the years, and people are not always sure what they should use, so therefore they don't say anything. Can that be a bit of an issue?
Yeah, I think it can be, and and sometimes the challenging stuff can be that. So for example, there for some autistic people, there is a tendency to be very focused on the words and their meanings, and I'm actually one of them, so I feel comfortable talking about this. So in my official diagnosis, it shows that I don't recognise micro-expressions and I don't recognise conversational pauses. So that can cause difficulties in a normal, in a sort of average conversation, because I might not recognise that somebody's disagreeing with me or agreeing with me, or I might misinterpret their facial cues, or they might misinterpret mine because, I'll share this with you. I once worked with somebody really closely who I admired and respected greatly, and I was really lucky that they shared the impact that my face was having on them. And they were saying, "Why are you angry at this?" And I'm like, "I'm not angry." And it kept happening. And eventually I just had buttocks in my forehead because I didn't want to impact this other person. That's quite an extreme thing, by the way. But essentially it was because my "I'm focused on what you're saying" face was like looked angry. And the benefit of actually webinars and Zoom conferences and things is I can see my face and modify it. Whereas if you can't see your face, you're not aware that you might be doing that. So that's quite good. But going back to that part of the diagnosis, what they said is, to compensate for that, I have an advanced understanding of language and its nuances, which is great for marketing terms and great for some of the things that I do to help entrepreneurs in science and technology position their products better, because I will understand the nuance of how that might impact people because I've had to study it and use it in a much more deliberate way than the typical person. But it also means language impacts me more. It's a bit like, I guess, somebody in a wheelchair having upper body strength. Many autistic people are very specifically focused on language because it's how they mitigate some of the other areas, which means that, people using neurodiversity when they are firmly focused on "I'm neurodivergent" can actually isolate those people from the people that want to help. So yeah, it can cause problems and challenges. But that's why we're here, to work those things through.
Yeah, exactly. And that's good, because I've had a read through of the fact sheet and the social model, as you say, of disability, and it is really interesting, isn't it, what came through, because obviously we will share this with everybody on this webinar, and just the first thing that I pick up with and it's a great thing to do, just the overlapping of some of the words. When you first said that on, it kind of took me a second, and then I realised why it was there, and it's true, isn't it? Because it's how you see things as well, because people see things so differently, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll also send out. I know you've seen it before, because we've CREST have been doing work in this area for some time to support more inclusion in our industry, but also the spectrum isn't what you think article would probably be a good one as well. So I'll send you that out again, because I think that's a useful framing topic. I know it's about autism, and I'm sorry for those people that want a little bit more about dyslexia and dyspraxia. I'm really sorry. I don't know enough to have useful things. I will rectify that and see if we can get some more handouts in those areas too. But feel free to connect with me, because I do know people that will have them. And I'm Cyber Go Giver on Twitter. So connect with me, and I'll get them for you if you want those instead, or as well as.
Great, thank you very much. Now, we've had a question. This is quite an interesting one. This person's saying they didn't see Tourette's on the list of neurodivergent types. Is there a reason, stance for that not being on the list? Or is it
do you know what? It's because, I'm going to be really honest, I pinched the slide, and that one's from the neurodiversity thing, and it should absolutely be on the list. So interestingly, one of the things that I've been kind of working on in the background is, again, because I'm a big fan of trying to accelerate what we're doing through looking at the journeys of other people. And if you look at Stonewall and what they did to say that homosexuality isn't a brain deviance, it's a different way of being as a human, then maybe that's something that we should look at and almost ditch neurodivergence and neurodiversity and start sort of looking at ADATO, which is sort of, you know, autism and ADHD and dyspraxia and dyslexia and dyscalculia and OCD and Tourette's, which ADATO includes. And I've got it kind of written down. So I was thinking, actually, it might be the equivalent of LGBTQ, but for neurodiversity, because I think we're stronger together, and I absolutely think that Tourette's should be on there. So apologies. It is definitely neurodivergence that should be supported.
And actually, that's not in the CREST report that we're looking at in the workshop. And I know the person that's asked that question is going to be in the workshop, so we'll bring that up. That's something we're
fantastic
there as well. So yeah.
If that person, I can't see the question, but if that person is somebody who has first-hand experience of Tourette's, I would very much love to have that input.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Thank you.
So yeah, thanks for raising that. Really appreciate it. So is anybody else got any other questions, or are you all saving them for the workshop, which I bet you are, aren't you? Okay, that's great. So is there anything else that you would like to cover off, Nicola, before we finish this webinar for today?
I think the only thing I would say is this has been a very, very broad top line of the subject, and I think we often approach support like it's a social exercise, and I think that's what I'd mainly like to see change, because actually, if you look at accommodations generally, just like in the social model where it talks about accommodations that might benefit other people, a lot of the accommodations for neurodivergence benefit other people as well. So for example, I'm just going to use an example. I, as an autistic person, for me personally, I can struggle with change sometimes. Now, the easy way to support me on that is to give me as much advanced warning as possible. And many other people that are autistic have said to me that they have some of the same challenges around change. Now, that could be seen as a block or a difficulty with an employee, which is often how managers that aren't as enlightened as I'd like see this. But actually, let's take that differently and talk about reflective thinkers, which there is a huge proportion of our society that are reflective thinkers, i.e. they need a little bit of time to process information to give their best output. So actually, giving everybody the information up front, wherever possible, means that you're leveling the playing field, not only for people like me that need some processing time to deal with change, but also reflective thinkers. You're giving them the information up front so they can give you a better output too. Now, people that aren't reflective thinkers, that are more instantaneous thinkers, the bingo brains, which are a significant proportion of entrepreneurs, to be honest, the blue sky thinkers, they won't read the information up front. My experience is they leave it in the pile and they kind of read it as they go along because they can and still produce their best output. Whereas reflective thinkers can't. They need that information up front. And actually, if you think about every single training course you've ever been on, pretty much, it's geared towards instant thinkers, because you get the training material at the time of delivery. You don't get it up front. So reflective thinkers are not only disadvantaged in the course because they're trying to dual process, but also the course is disadvantaged because they don't get their best input. So there are some huge sweeping changes that we'd need to do to the practices and policies of how we work as businesses if we were going to include everybody. And I'm not just talking about neurodivergent people here. I'm talking about everybody that thinks differently.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So we're now going to finish the webinar for today. As I say, I think as Ali said, most of you will be on there, or if not all of you will be on that workshop later. So we'll see you all in there. Hope you've enjoyed the webinar today. Thank you so much, Nicola, for presenting today. It is really appreciated and a really interesting subject. So thank you
for inviting me, and see you later at the workshop.
Yeah, see you later. Take care, everyone. Bye.